quick introductions. I'm Grant Fritchey. I'm the DevOps advocate for Redgate Software. Up on my screen now is my Twitter handle. You can also get a hold of me on email at grant.fritchey@redgate.com and or grant@scarydba.com, or heck, track me down at Pass or whatever. I don't know. I've got emails everywhere, so find me.
You will find Grant.
With me is...
sorry, my bad. I should have jumped in. Yeah, hello, I'm also here. My name is Chris Unwin, and I was here but moments ago before I had to go and watch some of the rest of this wonderful stream session from the sofa to recover from the hours worth of just talking. But I'm a solution architect at Redgate. As you can see, there's my Twitter handle at plant-based-SQL. Do go and follow me. I love a tweet. I always reply as well. Not that I'm shameless, but yeah, I'm always around as well. Same contact details as Grant. Let us know if you have any questions. Always happy to help out.
I'm trying to get the questions up. Do you have them available? Because if so, you're going to be...
I have. Oh, trust me, I'm gonna. Yeah, I've got the questions for you. Don't worry, because I'm new at this, and I need some help. So I'm just going to jump us back to Flyway 101 slide there. There we go. In fact, no, let's leave it on the contact details in case anyone wants to tweet us or ask us a question about Flyway, because we should definitely add that if anyone here has any kind of questions that they're just trying to get their head into Flyway or they want us to cover, then pop them in the little Q&A box and I will pose them to Grant and we will all absorb his big old brain of knowledge together.
Oh, this is going to be a short session is what you're saying.
We've got plenty of time. We've got half an hour to try and leech as much from you as possible. So I think maybe we should start off with the most straightforward question, the most basic question, of course. Grant, how do I use the Docker container? No. Grant, what is Flyway?
Oh, God, you're getting me excited.
No, I don't get excited. What is Flyway?
All right, so Flyway is an open source software, and it is managed and owned by Redgate Software, but it is open source, and it is a migrations-based tool for deploying databases. But it is for deploying Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, DB2, Mariah, more. And it
plus more.
Migrations just means deploying based on a manifest. It tracks manifests of changes and has a mechanism for automating all those things through a command line. It's insanely deep considering how silly simple it is. It's funny because I'm still learning it, right? I hate to say I'm an expert at it because I sure don't feel that way, because there's just so much there. There's just this. I keep finding a new layer and a new wrinkle to learn on because it's just great. But in a nutshell, I would say that's what it is. What do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you're absolutely bang on. I think the thing to bear in mind when you say kind of it's simple as anything is that, yeah, there's definitely complexities and layers and, of course, if it's not going to be a proper online event if you don't work a good Shrek quote in there, but Flyway is like onions. It's got layers. Flyway's not like cakes. But the point of Flyway, I think, is that it's database migrations made simple. Database migrations anywhere and for anything. More than 20 relational database management systems. You can run it through Docker. You can run it on Windows, on Linux, on Android. You can run it, right? And there's no UI, is there? There's nothing for us to interact with specifically.
Well, I mean, there's a command line, right? And so it's command line driven. And so it's from an interaction standpoint, it's what tooling do you like to use? And can you implement that tooling to work with it? I've been doing lots of work on PostgreSQL lately and using Azure Data Studio. That's the tool I've been using for my Postgres development. And It works fantastic with Flyway, especially because couple of little keystrokes, I can fire up a PowerShell window, right there inside of Azure Data Studio and issue my command line for deployment. It's fantastic.
And you could see like the databases and the command line and even your Flyway files all from within ADS, right?
Yeah. All within a single development system. I've also worked with Visual Studio Code doing the same thing.
Interesting. So what form do these migrations take then? I suppose we've been talking about, hey, migrations are kind of important in Flyway. I mean, they're kind of the basis of basically everything Flyway does. But right. What form do they take? So are we just throwing something at it? How are they structured?
Well, that's where things get fun, because it's based on the language of the database that you're working with. So let's just, I'm going to keep talking Postgres for just because it's where my head is. I've created using AWS DevOps, code build and code pipeline, and a Flyway container, by the way. I've built a deployment that the first migration is to create the database. So V1 of the migration script is create database, and so it creates a database. V1.1 was create tables, right? And from there. And so the basic idea of what makes up a migration script, how do you define it, is it's defined by what you need within the database tool that you're working on. So I was able to start from zero, create database, and then start creating tables and stuff on top of that. But you could start from an existing data structure with an existing code base and then just add the changes over time. And it's just kind of up to you how you want to build it out. It's extremely flexible. I mean, that's just the beauty of it. Do you want me to get into things like the repeatable runs and all that?
Yeah,
right now,
I think it's important. I think there's kind of two main concepts that people have to understand, right? And number one is you can write your migrations in Java or you can write them in SQL. Of course, being database people, we're going to write them in SQL. But for Java developers or people who want to integrate Flyway with their Java processes, they can write their migrations in Java, they can embed it in a Maven or a Gradle build. But when it comes to these migrations, there are those three main types of migrations. So I think those are the kind of key important things for people to understand, unless you disagree.
No, I agree with you completely. By the way, I'm supposed to mention that there is a community chat window there, and you guys can feel free to make comments, all that fun stuff. And someone did say that if you leave your Flyway out in the sun, it gets brown and starts sprouting little white hair. So, like an
excellent.
Not true. Flyway needs its vitamin D to run better. That's so it runs faster in the sun.
I heard that as well. Oh dear.
All right. Okay, yeah, so here's a great question. Somebody says, okay, look, I want to automate my database deployments. Smart person. I want to build a CI/CD process. Smart person. Why would I spend money on change automation and tool belt when I could just use Flyway and save money? You're right. It's open source. Go for it, right? Open source is free.
That being said, though,
raise your hand.
That being said, though, there are a couple of key things that we do have to point out as well, I suppose. I think we've been joined by Steve Jones already. Exciting. He can join us. So I think if I was going to offer an opinion on this one, I would say that Flyway is kind of part of the getting started journey. We see Flyway as being that excellent stepping stone onto, hey, I want to start automating my pipeline. I want to build something out. I'm going to have the devs write the scripts, all that sort of great stuff. And there's a couple of different editions, really, of Flyway. I'll talk about just the two of them. So you've got the Community Edition, and the Community Edition does does offer a good chunk of functionality, but then also there is a paid-for version, of course. There's you've got the community edition, then you've got the professional or enterprise, I guess, edition, which or editions in which you get access to kind of additional functionality like callbacks, dry runs. I think are included in that as well. There's also a level of support. There's a whole bunch of other things going on there. That being said, the SQL change automation components and the SQL tool belt are obviously, I mean, Grant, I don't know, you'll probably be able to speak to this better than me, but with the SQL tool belt, it's like bringing a bazooka to the party, right? It's going to get the job done. It will manage the scripts for you, try and help you manage, keep everything in order. It's going to generate the scripts for you. There's building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole lot more going on under the hood than you realize with change automation.
Yeah, I mean, and because change automation is, at least at this point, SQL Server driven, although Oracle's on its way, right? Are here, but not quite completely integrated. But anyway, sidetrack. The sophistication of the tool is radically different. Flyway's good, right? I can't throw rocks at Flyway because I'm loving it. The more I'm spending time in it, the more I'm enjoying it. Just the degree of flexibility built into such a small software package is amazing. But there's a level of flexibility in SCA. I mean, it's one of those, it's an old saying, but I'm an old person. You get what you pay for. You know what I mean? And sometimes free is flawless and glorious and wonderful, but other times, you spend a little money and you're going to be a happier person, right? I mean, it's just kind of the way it works occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Let's jump back then and talk about the again, let's get back to basics. So before the question and everything, we were talking about the three types of migrations in Flyway. So we've already talked about one of them. You've brought up versioned migrations, which is that V1 notation on the migration. And those migrations are specifically for obviously evolving the state of the database by making changes that you wouldn't otherwise run again, like creating a table or adding a not null column to a table and making sure it's populated with data, then making it not null, et cetera, versions. Right. So we can evolve the version of the database. But what are the other two then that we can leverage?
Well, I mean, we also already mentioned another one that we have, and that's the U or undo.
True.
So you can create, and this is the pro level only. The paid version, but you can add an undo script so that you've got a rollback mechanism built into your tool, into your versions. And if you marry those so that it, if it's V 4.1 and U 4.1, you can issue what's called a migrate command, which is the ability to go from 4 to 4.1, but you can also issue a rollback undo command and go from 4.1 to 4.0 with a customized script that handles all of your data and protects your systems and all that fun stuff. But then
exactly.
We have one more version, and that's the repeatable. And that's something like create view or create store procedure, something that you would necessarily be able to run over and over again and not have to worry about versions and whatnot. You build those into the repeatable scripts, and then they just run as needed. But the tool is smart enough to know which of the repeatable scripts go with which version, so that if you because you can deploy to older versions. And so if you deploy to an older version, it won't then try to create stored procedures against tables that don't exist. It will deploy the changes up to the right version. It's again, I love the sophistication of the tool, considering how simple it is to understand and use.
So given that it's simple, given that it's fairly easy to adopt, what would you say are kind of the key challenges or the key things to bear in mind for people adopting Flyway?
Key challenges. Ooh. Well, I mean, the most important thing you got to remember is that you've got to write your T-SQL. I said T-SQL, like a SQL server. You got to write your MySQL. You've got to write your PL SQL. You've got to create your code. It's not like some of the other tools that generates code for you. You've got to have that mechanism in place to figure out what code you're generating. That's the first and biggest hurdle, I would say. And honestly, I don't think it's that big a hurdle, because most of the time you're creating that code anyway. So finish the job, save that file, and yay, win. The second thing that I would point out is that, at least from my experience, managing the versions, you can mess that up. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's easy, and if you get it wrong, it sets things on fire. I mean, it's not like it'll destroy your database, it won't, but what it will do is it won't deploy, so you won't get the right stuff going out the door, and that's problematic. And it can generate errors. Yeah. So I mean, it does. In my experience, that's been my pain point, was like when I screwed up the naming standard, that hurt.
But it does specify kind of roughly what's gone wrong. Like the error messages that you get are generally very, very helpful and indicative of what's gone wrong. There is some kind of indication as to how things can be fixed or where things have gone wrong, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it's a very helpful tool. I mean, it walks you through the process. I mean, it's the documentation is also pretty good. The command line stuff. I mean, each command is just kind of clear what it's going to do and almost how it's going to do it. I mean, it strikes me that when I first started doing database deployments and automations, we built a tool similar to Flyway, because there just weren't third-party database tools at the time, and so we had to build our own, and it's shockingly similar, at least in some regards. I mean, there's differences, radical ones, especially because we did not even try to do a rollback or undo process at all. It was just nope, no attempt at all at that. But it's just, I find it interesting because I see the logic of how it works really well, because I've followed that logic once before.
Interesting, but I think with Flyway, because it's so simple, it's very easy to get up and running for people, and it's very easily adopted into teams that are kind of cross OS, cross RDBMS. Gives them a nice leg up. So for people getting started, there are kind of a few key commands really with Flyway, aren't there? So you've already covered a couple. You've said there's Flyway migrate, there's Flyway undo. And for anyone who's interested about getting the info about Flyway, of course, there's Flyway info. But then there is still a couple, and you did mention the baseline at the beginning as well. But there's two that we haven't really talked about, which is of course, if somebody changes a migration script that's already been deployed against a target, what happens? What will happen when we go to deploy to it?
I don't remember, because I've been going the happy path most of the time. What happens?
So obviously, if we change any of the scripts, it will change the checksum that we have logged. So the way that Flyway, as you say, the way that Flyway actually tracks the migrations against the target is it has this thing called the Flyway schema history table. So that's present on all of the targets that we're deploying to. It also allows us to check if there's objects existing in a schema, if it's an empty schema. This database has pre-existing objects, but not a Flyway schema history table. You should probably baseline this, etc., etc. But if you're deploying to somewhere that's already had a migration deployed against it, and then you've gone, I'll just change it, no one will notice. Of course, the checksum has changed, and we notice, don't we?
Right. Oh, yeah. That's true. I found that out the hard way, too, because I did try to break it, and it broke.
Oh, Grant.
I mean, it didn't break, but it noticed that I had made a change.
So naturally, of course. And I'll jump back in, which naturally, of course, means that we need to we need to do a couple of things. So when we ever migrate with Flyway, it does this thing called validation. And the Flyway validate command can also be used to do that, where it effectively checks the schema history table and then also resolves the migration scripts you've got locally and goes, okay, that looks about right, and I can see that I've got these migrations that need to be run. Do you want to Flyway migrate, run them all, or do you want to Flyway migrate to one version, to the next version, to the next version, if you're being a bit more cautious? Right. But of course, if that validation fails, if the checksum is mismatched, then we have basically two options, don't we? One is either change it back, but what's the second?
Well, I mean, roll forward, is the big deal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Flyway repair, which would obviously roll it forward and say, oh, no, this is absolutely fine. This schema history table just needs a bit of updating, and then it just...
Yeah.
All updated, everyone's happy.
Like I said, I'm embarrassed to call myself a Flyway expert because I still feel like I'm getting it all under control. I mean, and the one command you didn't ask about is the one I run on production all the time, which is Flyway clean.
Ah, yes. Well, that's my favorite one. Bye-bye, schema objects.
Yes, say no one run that on production. Grant was joking.
You can disable that though, can't you?
Yes. Yeah. You can make that not part of your process, and I would recommend you do that. But for those who don't know, Flyway clean, I actually use it a lot in my testing environments because what it does is it resets everything down to 0. So,
absolutely.
Be cautious in the use of that.
Definitely be cautious. Yes, absolutely. And your best friend is going to be your Flyway config file there as well, allowing you to actually disable that clean. But it also has a whole bunch of other capabilities in it. And speaking of capabilities, we've been joined by the lovely Steve Jones. Hello, Steve Jones.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, it does me good to hear your voice. Oh, so good. Yeah, really good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm missing the chance to see you, gentlemen. It's been too long.
Yeah, I don't know arguments there. Have you been using Flyway much, Steve?
I use it a little bit. I've actually been doing a bunch of Oracle work, so I've been dealing with Flyway there. And like you, gentlemen, I'm learning the commands and trying to get comfortable with the tool, right? The concept is something I've done before, but the mechanics of Flyway itself are always a little interesting.
Well, I mean, I always go back to it. It's simple, right? It's simple and clear, but it's sophisticated. So you can mess it up, right? I mean, it's not like you can just turn it on and it runs. I mean, and I've done that. I've my first time running the tool, I had it up and running, and I thought I'd broken something because it just kept working. I'm like, well, hang on, let me try this. It worked. And let me try that, and it worked. Let me try that, and it worked. I mean, it just was not hard. I mean, I just had it going. But then there was the inevitable, I messed it up, and and it was just on me because I wasn't paying attention.
Right.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple process, but everybody that's written a tool like this, right, or people that say run every script in this folder, they always run into little problems because they're expecting a very certain path of things to happen, and if you do it slightly differently, it doesn't work, right? So the naming, right, how you've organized things, all that stuff matters. So just getting comfortable with the specifics is the challenge. But I agree with you, right? It just tends to work, and it works in a container, which I think is fantastic for automation purposes, right? I don't have to download and install stuff. I can just run it in a container, which is fantastic.
Oh yeah,
so
the AWS pipelines just eat up containers, man. It's fantastic.
I'm aware of time, and we've got 5 minutes left. We've got 2 questions to pose. We have also been joined by the fabulous, wonderful Kathy Kellenberger, who hopefully can see and hear us. I can see a name. Kathy, can you put a face to... Oh, she's disappeared. Oh, she'll be back, I'm sure. She's leading the next session, which I'm going to stick around for as well, which will be the SQL prompt tips and tricks, which is bound to enhance at least some of the development things that I do on a regular day-to-day basis. But I'm sure we'll be rejoined by Kathy shortly. Hey, there she is.
Here.
Hi, Kathy.
It takes like 30 seconds for the camera to turn on for some reason.
Well, let me.
Well, you're just in time to help us answer a couple of Flyway questions. So hopefully the four of us can try and tackle this together. So Grant, did you want to grab the first one?
Sure. Yeah. I'm worried about schema stability locks and blocking on frequently accessed tables. How does Flyway deal with no downtime deployment? Well, here's the fun thing. Flyway doesn't. The migration scripts are yours to write. And so how you write those migration scripts and how you deploy the database and how Flyway implements the changes that you define are on you to define. So how you want it to run those scripts and whether or not it's going to lead to blocking and all that other fun stuff, it's all about how you write the scripts. If you need to migrate, say, for example, I want to implement a nullable column, so that it doesn't affect my code and all the existing code is there. It doesn't affect the deployment. It's just add the column. It doesn't block anything. Everybody's access continues. Great. And then upon a successful conclusion, we're going to do a second deployment to make that column not null and update store procedures and all that fun stuff. You can do it that way.
And the good thing, I suppose, just on top of that is that Flyway by nature is incremental. So that means we've got all of these tiny little migration scripts, which means that we're gradually kind of updating and evolving the schema piece by piece by piece by piece, which means it's a fairly small impact. And the good thing is you can actually choose the behavior as well of the transactions. For databases that support transactions, you can either choose, hey, do you know what? Let's if I hit an error at any point, just roll back to the last successful script, or you can say, that's it, never mind, wipe out the whole lot. So there's kind of options in Flyway there for you, but you have the control. And you do have things like callbacks that you can bring into the fray. You can run dry runs. So there's definitely tons of options there. Steve and Kathy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
So the only thing I always tell people, right, is that there's no magic in how we do these deployments, right? Microsoft has dictated what we're allowed to do, what's an online operation, right? What's a metadata change, what requires a schema lock. That's all stuff inside the platform. There's no tool in the world can break those rules for Microsoft. But what we allow you to do is we facilitate you to write those scripts. As Grant said, right, it's up to you to write that script and say, here's how I want to make this change, right? I want to use a multi-step process to minimize locks, or I want to kind of do something in the background that's a metadata change. So Flyway just supports all of that. I wish we could just do no downtime deployments without anything going wrong, but we're bound by the rules of Microsoft. So you can't make a change in certain ways without creating locks and causing some limited downtime.
Or by the rules of MySQL, or by the rules of Postgres, or
right.
I mean, we can't get away from those. Well, I mean, and it answers the second script too, where they're saying that they need to support 2 versions of the database, and what they want to do is have 2 versions live until the deployment is successful, and then delete the old version. I would say that it's the same answer, is that you make it, our deployment, we're releasing version 3 of the app. And so there's the 3 release creates the 2 versions, and the 3.1 release deletes the old version. And you just deploy 3.0, and then you deploy 3.1 upon success, I would say. I mean, how you define 3 and 3.1 or 3 and 3A. I mean, and you could do 3A, by the way.
You can do the rename thing, right? You can deploy a new proc and with the new name and test it while the old one's there, and then do a transaction with 2 renames if you'd like. I mean, that's the minimal way to do it.
Sure.
You could even include a callback, I suppose, as a post-deployment trigger to check the version of the database if you have something that it can check. For instance, there's obviously a number of things that you could include, but that's the problem, I suppose, with Flyway, is that there's so much to do. Now I'm going to be the timekeeper, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's time.
I'm going to bang my watch because I don't want to miss a second of what Kathy has to tell us. So first of all, thank you all 3 of you for being here. This is fantastic. I very rarely get to do this, and I feel very warm and happy. But thank you, Grant, for being here for the whole session and for taking us through that. I feel like I know Flyway even better now. And there are tons of resources available on the Redgate website, as well on the Flyway website, and also tons of blogs available. So on the Flyway website, there's a full list of blogs and resources available for you for getting started with Flyway, even a bunch written by Grant over here, which are super cool
lots
and
more
interesting.
coming, because when I get back from holiday, that's all I'm doing is writing Flyway blog posts. So
amazing. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, and I will take the opportunity to hand over to Steve and Kathy, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Grant.